It's my pleasure now to introduce Chris Watts. Chris Watts is the Executive Director of the National Fitness Foundation. The National Fitness Foundation is a Project Play 2020 founding member, and they've been a terrific partner of Project Plays for the last few years. We're really thrilled to have him here to introduce the Call for Leadership panel. Chris, come on up. All right, well, look at that. Chris is giving everyone here a fantastic opportunity to take the sports sampling survey we sent to your email. So we're waiting for him. Check it out. Take that survey. Let us know how many sports you've sampled. November Project isn't on there, but maybe it should be. You've all sampled it now, and we appreciate it. Chris, here we go.
I'm coming. Better late than never, I guess.
Oh, you're supposed to be loud. Here. Here.
Except it's on the chair.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
All right. We'll figure this out.
Thank you, Chris.
All right. Thanks, Reese. Hello, everybody. I think this is on, but we'll go with it. Well, today we've heard a lot about the Project Play framework, national partnerships, but as many as you know, it's really what happens on the ground and at the local level that matters. Okay. And that's why we're so excited about what was announced earlier today with Project Play Baltimore and the release of the State of Play report that many of you have seen in your booklet that was distributed with the packets. As they move to activation mode, I want to let you know that you can count the National Fitness Foundation in. We're excited to commit to $50,000 to supporting physical education in East Baltimore, because we know that when kids have quality PE, they're more likely to play sports, embrace physical activity, and reach their potential inside and outside the classroom. As a founding member of Project Play 2020, we're proud to join national leaders to lift sports participation across the country. This next panel is designed to discuss how a diverse set of organizations can come together, put aside differences, and work together towards a common goal. With that, I'd like to introduce Tom Farrey, my bearded brother, who's going to lead the panel today and facilitate the discussion. Thank you.
Where am I? We have more than 3 people on stage, so let's bring up a couple chairs.
So because
You think I could leave this here? I don't want to go on the stage.
where we're trying to go,
It's very heavy.
I got you.
we can develop,
No, yes, right. It's
try to get things out, we can build some.
no, it does have a lot of stuff.
I
That's
mean, there's
cool.
just a lot of ways we can at this and try to accelerate the speed.
Laura,
That's our
Gary.
objective. Yeah. Reality is we control very little, so
Yep.
Gary,
speed up the process.
Caitlin, Beth,
Did you hear us okay?
Bob. Okay,
It's funny, as you hear people reflect on
all right.
this,
We'll figure this out.
we all think back to our own.
All righty.
You look at
So, yeah, thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. And thank you again for supporting Project Play Baltimore. It's really terrific what you're going to be doing there and your partnership in Project Play 2020. It's all extremely exciting. So, the name of this panel is Collaboration Nation, What's Possible when Silos Connect for Kids, and I'd like to introduce our panelists here. So, the first is Beth Baran from Dick's Sporting Goods. She is co-executive director of the foundation there and also chief counsel. Okay. Next, we have Dave Egner, who is the president and CEO of the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation.
Yeah, unless you want to.
We have Caitlin Morris, who is general manager of Global Community Impact for Nike. And sitting in for Lou Shapiro, who could not make it here for travel reasons, is Laura Robbins, Senior Vice President of Global and Academic Affairs for the Hospital for Special Surgery. She has done a lot of work with access to healthcare in culturally diverse communities. And finally, last but not least, Gary Zenkel, President of NBC Olympics and President Business for NBC Sports Group. Welcome, Gary. Okay, all right, what a terrific panel we have here. I've been excited about this for weeks now. Let's just start out with a general concept of how you see your organization fitting into the ecosystem of youth sports, and particularly quality youth sports. Start with you, Beth.
So I, as Tom mentioned, I work with the Dick's Sporting Goods Foundation and also with Dick's Sporting Goods. So we have the philanthropic grant making side through our foundation, and then we have the retail side where we are very active in our communities. So we're interacting with young athletes kind of at the exciting moment when they're either registering for their new season or they're coming in to shop for the equipment. So part of our mission is to inspire and enable sports participation. So where we are in the ecosystem is sort of neutral because we're kind of brand agnostic, and what we want to do is motivate participation in any sport with the whole collection of brands that we offer in our stores. So I'd say what we're most emphasizing is quality participation and access to sport for all kids.
Terrific. Caitlin, let's jump over to you, and we'll come back to Dave because we're a little strategic about this.
Sure. I was listening to Beth and thinking, well, we're a bit brand agnostic too from where we sit in global community impact. Our whole focus is on really believing that sport has the power to move the world, but we can only unleash that potential in kids if they believe themselves that they're athletes. And we know that all kids were made to play. If you've ever seen a group of kids, it's really hard for them to sit still. But how that actually translates into them having the ability, confidence, and desire to move for life, that's the challenge that we collectively have in front of us. And I think that's an all brands pre-competitive issue.
Great. Laura?
Yes, so, coming from the healthcare world, Hospital for Special Surgery has been known for treating professional athletes, many teams, many of which I'm sure you know. But we have a history of working with kids in the community as well. And our focus is trying to prevent those injuries. We don't want to treat them when they have an injury. We want to really think about what have we learned from professional athletes and how can we apply that to children in the community. And we have a program that we are focusing on parents and children as well as coaches that you'll hear more about, as time goes on. But it's really taking those lessons and making sure that kids are healthy physically and emotionally and want to play sports.
Great. Gary?
Back in 2014, NBC, or I should say prior to 2014, my answer to this question would be by providing great coverage of sports events and inspiring America's youth with great storytelling. And we continue to do that. But when we acquired the Olympics through 2032, which was back in 2014, we reflected a bit on how important it was for us, selfishly, that the United States continued to succeed at the Olympic Games. And we began to look at, what's the level of participation in Olympic sports, and quickly realized that in some cases it wasn't great. Met Tom along the way in that exploration and got a better sense of the issues, and then ultimately began to explore how we could play a role, and looked at some of the companies out there that were involved in helping create access, managing teams, leagues, providing parents tools to bring their kids together with sports programs. Ultimately acquired a company called Sports Engine, which you've heard of and we've talked about today on a couple of different panels. And it is, a great software solution, a great company that's committed to opening up the doors for parents in the United States to access sports programs across the country. Right now, that is a very big focus of NBC Sports.
Definitely. Now, Dave, you're in a little bit, you are the one person on this.
One of these things is not the same.
These are all national organizations. You are not. You have a regional focus. But tell us how you see yourself plugging into, the telling of a story that, is at a national level valuable.
So Mr. Wilson owned the Buffalo Bills. For those of you who don't know him, passed away in 2014. And the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation is his estate that was put forward to benefit Southeast Michigan and Western New York. So we're geographically locked in 16 counties. But I think the impact will be national, Tom, with the work we're able to do in those spaces. So start with analysis. We didn't see clean analysis of sports and recreation in either market. So we did the sports scans that were in Buffalo, Rochester, and in Southeast Michigan, very specific on what was the ecosystem, how do we define it, what are its strengths and weaknesses. And I think our role will continue to be that kind of higher level, what is an ecosystem, what's a coalition of the willing, who do we fund to fill gaps, how do we create coordinated outputs, all through our grant making and through key partners.
Mm-hmm. Well, you also have the opportunity to pilot projects, right? I mean, test out some of these ideas at a local level.
It's a privileged position to be in. Yeah, but we want to affect change. So, and we have a board that's willing to take risk. So we're willing to pilot projects that will get kids more active, more engaged in sports and recreation. You know, there's only really two caveats to the work we'll be doing. One, it's got to have an impact on young people, and two, it's got to eventually be sustainable. How do we sustain this beyond what will be the remaining lifespan of the foundation, which has to spend out of existence by January 8th of 2035.
Yep. So let me ask you, so what is the, and maybe Caitlin, this is for you, what is the, we're throwing a lot of numbers out there today. What's the one that you think this group ought to be thinking about most, and how to move that number?
Yeah, it's a big issue. When we talk internally about how do we measure success, one of the things we really just sort of talk about is how do we move the unmoving. And when you look at the numbers that are out there, some of it gets muddied by, is it multi-sport? Is that the same kid who showed up to play in the community basketball league that also showed up to play community baseball and played soccer? And part of what we look at when we invest in program partners is how do you not just get the first 100 kids who show up to participate, but how do you identify ways to get those kids who wouldn't normally come, whether they're girls, whether they're in communities that are generally underserved, whether they're kids who don't currently have a great coach, but the kids who aren't moving, how do we get them to move? So I would sort of say if there's a number we try to move the needle on, it's that, because kids who move will move the needle.
Mm-hmm. Beth, any thought on that?
So I agree with what Caitlin said. I think the other number we think about quite a bit is the growing disparity of access. And I think the statistics that you published today show that we're becoming, in terms of youth sports, a group of haves and have-nots. And so our foundation is particularly focused on funding in communities where there isn't as much access to quality sports education and to public school sports programs, because we think that that's a pretty easy way to get access to all kids is through school sport.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Dave, you work in Detroit, a city that has a distinct have and have not economic scenario there. You've been involved in a number of other initiatives, non-sport related, that have tried to address that gap. Any ideas, any guidance, any advice as this group moves forward?
Sure, it's simple. No, it's some of the most complicated work to do, because it's not just a matter of access from a standpoint of facilities, it's an access in terms of culture. You've created cultural divides that are racial, that are by income levels, and so attacking them require multiple attack points. They require community engagement at levels we have not yet experienced the way we need to. We've got to think differently about how we want to ask kids to do what they want. We need to think about how we're doing that and how we're educating parents on the results we're getting back, and we have to listen to the data and what they're saying. So it's one thing to ask, another thing to listen. And we don't do that very well in our urban centers, and frankly, we don't do it very well in our rural areas as well. And these disparities make it more difficult.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Any guidance on how to, given your experience with collective impact, how to create alignment among key stakeholders on a given initiative? I mean, for instance, you did good work on the New Economy Initiative in Detroit.
Sure. I mean, the New Economy Initiative was an economic development initiative. It started as a $100 million fund that 12 foundations participated in, and we recapitalized for another 35 or 40 million. And the first 96 million produced 2.9 billion in economic impact. 3 lessons from that. 1, start with assets. We tend to start with deficits. Start with assets. These kids are assets. If we ask them what they want, and then we listen to them, and then we look at the alignment of existing programs, we can start to make simple adjustments very quickly. 2, someone has to wake up every day thinking about this. You've really got to have that backbone organization or a local coordinating body, somebody who gets up and says, what are we going to do about this gap or this hole? And I think the third piece is storytelling. Ultimately, you have to change these cultural issues. And you can only do that through telling stories, which I think folks on this panel are doing a great job at, but we've got to get that down to a local level. How are we telling the stories of success and kids that are having success because of their participation and activity levels?
I mean, Gary, you're in the storytelling business. I mean, where do you see an NBC Sports plugging into supporting the storytelling piece, or maybe even the technology piece, connecting kids with the full array of experiences? Can we close some of the gaps through those assets?
I wish the answer were a clear yes, because not only does NBC do a great job, so many other organizations, media companies, and there's so many great stories to tell, and there are more and more pathways to tell those stories, and more outlets for people to view them. But it's probably not quite accomplishing the goal. If you had asked me, Tom, the prior question, participation for us is what matters most. And I think maybe an ingredient that hasn't truly been addressed is motivation. And yes, there are the haves and have-nots, and so it's sometimes unfair to criticize or just to evaluate or question motivation. But what is it? When I was a kid, and so many of us have reflected today on our own experiences, and I'm glad Jeremy, who I know is a lot younger than I am, seems to have had a similar experience. So it isn't that long ago that play was what we strove for. That's what we sought. That's what our parents denied us when we did something wrong. Okay, you can't go outside today, and yet now we're all in this room and spending a lot of time on trying to figure out how to get kids to do that. And you and I, Tom, have from time to time, or you've probably humored me, but from time to time talked about what are the incentives that we can impose on the system to inspire kids to play beyond great stories. And I don't know what the answer is to that.
Yeah, Laura?
I agree with what everyone's saying. I think we have to think about the stories we're telling. And traditionally, the stories were about winning the gold medal, breaking records. And I think what we learned from our experience working in communities, that's important, but it's not important to all kids and their families. So I think we have to think about what are the stories to be able to engage those kids in the type of programs that are going to get them off the couch, get them active, get them doing sports that maybe is not winning the gold medal, but getting them out there. We heard it in some of the stories today from the kids. So I think we have to take a step back and say, what has worked traditionally maybe when we were all going into sports? Today, what do we need to listen to and then enact on that?
And so who are the audiences that most need to consume those stories? Is it mayors to make it a higher priority on their list? Is it parents? Is it school administrators who are defunding school sports? I mean, who are the audiences?
I think it's all audiences. I think that if we're going to be change agents and get kids active, kids from different communities, the haves, the have-nots, we keep using those words, I think that those stories have to be told on many levels. I think for people who are looking at policy, and we talked a lot about mandating, coaching, training, it has to be the people who set policy that need to understand why it's important, perhaps, for coaches to have training that's common to all, whether you're a volunteer coach or a paid coach. So I think it has to be different stories that reach different people so that we raise the bar and make change happen across all those different audiences.
Dave, when we talk about incentives, I mean, this is what grant making is, right? It is money if you do something else. I mean, how do you see your $1 billion that you need to get rid of, not all on youth sports, I know, over the next 17 years as being a catalyst to, change the story, at least in the regions where you're working?
Oh, well, it's, I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as incentive, but you're right, it is incentive when you look at it from the standpoint of how do you get groups to take operating support by agreeing to certain metrics and outcomes and participating in certain ways. That's traditional grant making. I think there's an overlay of storytelling on this that is essential if we're going to have success. Because ultimately we've got to change a parental culture. One that says it's okay if my kid doesn't play travel ball. My kid should be in more than one sport. And what we have seen, it's been a bit of a surprise. It's been really gratifying to see the reports that Aspen did with the community foundations get taken up by the local media and then reused. So there was the outflow. But in Rochester, they did the spring sports edition. You know that one in the local paper where they show all the kids that are all the best athletes in the region, right? In Rochester, they said, you think that multiple sports sampling thing isn't important? Look at these kids. And every one of those kids played multiple sports. Every one of those kids had higher GPAs. They picked it up and started telling the story for us. So in some respects, I think it's getting the data out in a way that's accessible to the media and others to tell the story and building a campaign around that, which in 16 counties, we can certainly focus in that way.
I mean, Laura, you're the research chief at HSS. I mean, what role do you see data and research playing in changing the ballgame?
I think it's pivotal. I mean, especially if we're talking about changing policy. If you look at the public health issue of just osteoarthritis, kids that get have ACL repair, 50% will go on to have osteoarthritis, and that's a huge burden on society. So collecting that data and being able to say that market, which is the public health people, you have to have data. You have to have clinical data to show that if you, one of the programs we're doing, which is HSS Sports Safety, is we're creating very specific tailored prevention programs to prevent ACL injury based on age and type of sport. You have to have that data to be able to say, look, we did this and we found that this makes a difference. So I think it's very valuable. I don't think we can speak from experience, but we also have to speak from what we know works and doesn't work.
So what kind of data is, and this is a question for you, Caitlin, because you think in sort of a marketing type of way, but Beth, maybe you can jump in here as well. What type of data is most useful? That which points out the problem or that which points out the opportunity in terms of rallying people toward progress?
I think that, first of all, this thing we talk about internally, that this is the least active generation in history, and we should never get comfortable with that. And so in some ways, it sort of depends where you are in the conversation. If people don't know there's a fire, they're not going to send a fireman. On the other hand, people also have to feel like they're empowered to put the fire out themselves. And that's where I was thinking about, well, which audience and what are we doing? I think at this moment in time, part of what you have to do in your communications is you have to give people a sense of agency, that they themselves have a way of making a difference. And we experience that a lot with our own employees, where we have invested in training our retail employees how to be better coaches when they go volunteer in the community. But what we learn from working with our employees, I think, can translate into things we can do with consumers. But I think right now there has to be, from a marketing perspective, we always talk about what's your call to action for the consumer, whether it's asking them to donate their time or their money, but how are they going to actually be part of the solution?
And to add to that, in our organization, we use the language of crisis, right? So we talk about this on a daily basis as there being a crisis in youth sports. We've largely viewed it as a crisis in funding because we do worry about the amount of money that's going out of youth sports, and yet the perception, this disconnect that there is a lot of money that we're seeing through your data is being in higher income families, driving that kind of elite performance of youth sports. And so part of our storytelling, and I think part of the messaging is we've created an entire campaign around sports matter, right? So that is the call to action to remind a generation and the public that sports matter. It matters for youth development, it matters for character building, it matters for the leadership that will come, because it's more than elite athletes and this quest for the professionalization of sports, it really is about being good citizens of the world. So we talk about it in the sense of crisis, and then we have used some pretty staggering statistics about the number of schools that may not have any high schools in particular that may not have high school sports programs. So that's some of the emotional hook, that because it's terrifying if we think about a world without sports or schools without sports. And yet then I think on the other side that the emotional connection that we want to do through our other storytelling is the uplifting power of sports. So we do that through documentaries. We do that through a lot of brand advertising on NBC and some of our others, and our strategic partnerships with Nike to tell this collective story that this does matter, and sports is transcendent and fun. So I think it's a combination of those factors that, depending on your motivation, whether you're a policymaker, whether you're an educator, whether you're a parent, whether you're a kid, if you kind of approach it with a multi-factored campaign, you will be able to find some messaging that resonates.
Got it. In about 15 minutes, we're going to take questions from the crowd, so please start loading them into Slido, and my man Andre here will take a look at them, and you can upvote them, which ones you like, and we'll ask the best ones.
Tom,
at the end.
continuing on this theme, we've reached a point in society where we've compartmentalized issues financially. We don't want to pay for arts. That's nice and fluffy. And we've forgotten that music has a correlation to math. We've forgotten that visual arts has a correlation to humanities. We've done the same thing with sports. It's just sports. Do we really need PE? Come on. I didn't want to be the kid in the shorts running the mile. I hated that. And we've alienated that or taken it away from the downstream cost. So there is this urgency. I'll give you this, the Southeast Michigan statistics. This is from your study. We did a series of surveys. 13% of kids in Southeast Michigan get an hour a day of exercise as recommended by the CDC. The US average is 27%. So if you get 13% to 25%, that's all, just not even all the way to the national average, your downstream healthcare cost with the current cohort of 16, 18-year-olds is $1.2 billion. And next year we add another grade to that. So that's $1.2 billion in my pocketbook and your pocketbook. This is not about sports. Sports is a means to an end here about making better citizens and making society work better.
Yep.
And I think we have to reinvest in that messaging a bit.
So when you take those statistics into the business community, do you see eyes brighten? Does it seem to unlock potential partnerships?
We've seen reactions, and it's very early in this process, but we've seen eyes widen. The trick now is come back to the other side of storytelling. What do we do about it? What's the implementation strategy? And we've got these partnerships with the community foundations, which are really critical. We're going to fund some staffing inside of them to create roundtables so that the community's brought together, business people are brought together around the 8 place to say, all right, here's the data. What do you want to do about it collectively as a community? And I think that will start this buy-in process. You can't move without an army of the willing, and we have not yet galvanized or created that army.
What's interesting here, I mean, everybody saw the Project Play 2020 announcement earlier today. 2 work groups formed on coaching and sports sampling. They'll figure out exactly what their deliverables are by the fall, hopefully. But let's just sort of take a step back and talk about the potential of with these organizations, highly siloed. You know, I mean, sports is a really interesting space. It's one, you know, this is one of the few countries in the world that does not have a ministry of sports or a department of sports. Or I mean, you deal with when you go to these foreign countries, Gary.
Always.
There's no such thing here. There's no entity to kind of coordinate sport development here. Yeah. So, to me, that's one of the great opportunities with Project Play 2020 is these groups are going to get in a room and think about what can we do together. Any ideas? Where do you see the potential of this?
Well, I think that all of us, especially those of us that have commercial interests, certainly us, can clearly see the benefits. I mean, it's almost measurable in greater participation in sports, right? It creates fans. Fans watch more sports. Fans play more. Rob and Freddie would say the same thing. Nike would say the same thing, Dick's, et cetera. But at times there are conflicts, right? We're competitors too. And you wonder to what extent does that undermine the collaboration and the common good, whatever we could achieve if we ever truly, rode exactly in the same direction. We're all after the same thing. We want kids to play, and we want kids to participate, beyond, I guess, free play. But free play is the perfect starting point. Does the government bring us all together, under the Ministry of Sport? It's hard to imagine that could happen today.
I'm not proposing that, by the way. I'm just making an observation that explains why we're so
Other
siloed.
fish are frying.
Yeah.
But look, you're starting us here. You're giving us a lot of direction, you and the efforts that are being made with organizations that you have brought together. You've given us a bit of a roadmap. We can all sort of see what it might look like on the other side, because we kind of lived it before. But how do you get us all together, whether it's creating incentives through the contribution of, financial contributions, real estate, stuff, technology. How do we maintain our commercial interests in this industry and serve this sort of common interest of increasing interest in sports and play, which we know at the end of the day will help all of our businesses? I don't have that answer.
Well, how much faith do you have in the idea that at 12 and under, we're not talking about competing for the attention of consumers who are 25 years old or even 18 or 15, but at 12 and under, the idea that, look, everyone should invest in every kid having access to a quality sport opportunity in America, that if that happens, all boats will be lifted. How valuable do you see that as a, strategic aligner, I guess?
Well, I think that's the appropriate group to focus on. One, I think parents still have a fair amount of influence over 12 and unders. And to the extent that they're the primary conduit between those of us that are fighting for this or otherwise commercially interested in it and the kids' interest and motivation to participate in sports, you got a fighting chance of accomplishing that at 12 and under. If you focus on 15 to 18, you're going to struggle. And kids have less access to technology. Perhaps that still gives us a fighting chance. I think we're fighting a battle against technology. That seems to be where today's fun is happening versus what we used to do when we went
Do you
out.
think organizations in the sports space recognize that, or do they still see themselves as competitors, right? Is it, are you competing against media companies with each other, leagues with each other, or is really the competition, the screens that are providing entertainment experiences that are desirable to kids?
Generally speaking, no. We're not competing with ESPN. We are the only guys that show the Olympics, and they're the only ones that show Monday Night Football. So, in its sort of simplest form, no. But I think as you drill down, yes. I think teams compete, leagues probably compete, right? Sponsorship, ticket sales, maybe participation, not sure. We're all now talking multi-sport play is critical, so perhaps that isn't a big issue. But I'm not sure we're all completely aligned. Look, in the youth sports participation space, league and team management, there's Jeremy and Brian are in the room where there's tons of competition.
Yeah.
And it's all, a lot of the motivation for it is in the right place. But there is a commercial aspect to it, and market share in that space will ultimately determine, who probably survives. So is that serving the interest of truly of sports participation, even though these are great tools to aid parents and kids to find programs? Yeah.
one of the big trends we're seeing now is youth sports is shifting from one that has been dominated by, mom and pops, almost exclusively like local organizations. They're created, they put together a tournament or a team or otherwise, but now we're seeing major national corporate players get involved. Dick's is among them, NBC Sports among them. Nike's already been in the space obviously for a while now. Is that good or bad or to be determined? Corporations, getting in there with their technology, with their business principles, with their needs to make shareholders happy. Make the case for why it's a good thing, Beth.
I do think it's a good thing, and I also think we're willing to. So I think Project Play and then Project Play 2020 is important for all of us who may be competitors because it provides a neutral forum where we can share ideas, and I think we're all coming with a level of openness to say this solving this problem is bigger than any one of us, and so because we can't do it alone, even though we're working in kind of siloed spaces. But if that collective impact model has meaning and can't be done alone by definition. And I think the role of Dick's as a corporation, and we are publicly traded, so we have responsibility to our shareholders as well, is that we're highly accountable for what we're doing as a result of being a large corporation. We're accountable to our customers. We have a high level of visibility. We're accountable to our shareholders. And so I think our learnings from being in the space can be leveraged for the benefit of the smaller organizations with whom we have partnerships. I mean, we have a very large community field operation who have these relationships with all of these small sports leagues, and then we also have a technology platform where we're working with NGBs and state associations, and it's a conversation that we're having, and we're trying to learn from them and to improve both our technology and our giving to meet our customers and to meet the leagues where they are and to understand what their needs are and respond to it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's appropriate that we're in this space, and I think that we can continue to evolve towards collective greatness.
The $15 billion plus industry that is youth sports, was on the cover of Time and otherwise, is largely travel-based sports. I mean, so if you can get into this space and you want to make money, you follow the money. So how do we avoid the scenario where everybody's just trying to cater to the families that have deep pockets, when the family's less than $25,000? There's not much money to be made there, certainly on a per person, per family basis. How do we avoid that scenario? Caitlin, any thoughts?
Yeah, for Nike, people really believe and bleed our mission statement to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. And if you have a body, you're an athlete. It's not even a question. I think that the employees of Nike, when we talk about how do we show up in this work, lots of people can write a check. What do we bring? We bring the power of our brand, and we bring the power of our employees and their passion. And those are the two things that we think set us apart. And so, the sort of one of the ambition just of the Nike employees to make a difference in the world is pretty powerful. And we as a company have always felt accountable, not just to our shareholders, but to our employees around what we do. And so in that sense, it's an interesting, I understand why you're asking the question, but it's so part of our culture to just show up and do the right thing that it's, in some ways, it's not an issue. On the other hand, what I will sort of say is, we as a community impact team, we run a portfolio approach. We invest in things that are unbranded or have a shared brand like Project Play. We do things that are a little bit closer to home and maybe smaller, but tell a story that the brand wants to tell, and have a little bit more Nike branding associated with them. But then that's how you leverage the power of the brand to get out there and talk to consumers about what we're doing. So I think there's a role for both sort of the collaborative and sometimes the sort of go it alone, but it all adds up to a bigger picture.
Right. I mean, we're through Sports Engine investing heavily in technology that provides search and discovery of athletic programs, many of which are do not have a price. So some of the investment that's going to essentially seize the commercial opportunity is also benefiting participation, access, et cetera. But bringing all of that, ensuring that it's always in the interest of broad access and participation is something we all have to continue to work on.
Absolutely. One last question, then we're going to turn it over to the crowd. You have some questions lined up in a moment? You good? Okay. So there were a lot of people on stage earlier today. We had to scrunch people in. I didn't realize we had so many people sign up for the project that the stage wasn't large enough to hold us all, which is terrific. At the same time, as significant as that group is, it's going to take even more organizations to think about how to plug in meaningfully. What types of groups were missing from that from the Project Play 2020 advisory group announcement today? Who else needs to be brought into this conversation and think about how they're going to plug in?
So, one of the things we've all talked about in using different language, but sort of that relentless focus on the end user. And in this case, it's that kid. How do they actually have a positive experience with play? And most of these national organizations who are on stage today don't necessarily get a chance to get out in the field, see directly for themselves what's going on with the kid and that coach on a regular basis. I think there are a lot of things that we can do nationally, but then there's some things that we have to do closer to home at a city-based level. We always enjoy aligning ourselves with really strong partners to sort of work with community organizations at that city level too. There's some great work that we've been doing with Laureus, starting in New York City, about how do you actually create that network of on-the-ground direct service organizations and how they build capacity.
It has to start at the community level. I mean, communities participating in whatever we create is only going to be successful if their voice is heard. So, we're partnering with about 75 organizations on our sports safety program, and we're asking not only the organizations, but the parents and the kids. Yeah. What do they need? What do they want? What do they understand? So I think it has to be at that community level.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sport is, there's certainly the theory of Project Play since inception has been, let's build a framework that all stakeholders, that makes a vision that everybody can nod their heads at, a set of strategies that make sense to everyone. Begin talking initially to the folks who control policies and practices and partnerships under the idea that a parent at the bottom, if they're going to demand quality but none of the policy, everything is misaligned, they're not going to find success. So ultimately we do need to get to the parent, and we do need to take it down to the community level and test this stuff out. Is that your perspective, Dave?
I think that you're spot on. We've used the term ecosystem a number of times. We're not using the word garden system. Gardens are, I know where the lettuce is, and I know where the tomatoes are, and I know where the carrots are. This is a rainforest. And there are going to be different, all kinds of plants growing in places you've never anticipated, whether they're large groups playing or little groups that are playing at the local level, like downtown boxing gym in Detroit, where 10% of the kids actually box and the rest study. Different plants are going to nourish different people in different ways. So it might be less time about who else joins on the stage and how the stage gets in community. Mm-hmm. We're ready in Buffalo, Rochester, and Detroit, by the way. Anytime you're all ready to come play, we'll listen to the ideas. We want to pilot the heck out of it and see what works.
Well, great. In your post-event survey that you'll receive tonight about 6 p.m. or so, one of the questions is, if and how do you want to plug into Project Play 2020? We haven't defined the ask of organizations yet, but we just initially want to get a sense of, from all of your organizations, do you find it interesting? Please share your thoughts with us, and we will follow up in due time. We'd like to go to some questions. What we got, Andre?
So our first question is, do large health insurance companies actually want to see the proliferation of quality and consistent sport programs as a means to cut future healthcare costs?
That's interesting. There you go.
There's an incentive.
There's an incentive, yeah.
Lower premiums.
Yeah, I think again, it's going to go back to if you can demonstrate that if you teach a child how to play a sport and prevent an injury, as opposed to going and playing a sport and then needing surgery and all the medical costs, you would think there would be an incentive there to really, incentivize people to actually get out and be healthy and not have to incur those costs, those medical costs. So it is one of the things we're looking at with our program at the hospital. How can we develop that incentive for insurance companies? But we have to have that data. We have to be able to show that keeping kids healthy in the long run is going to save medical costs.
You have a thought, Gary?
No, I just, if one could get a lower insurance premium if they were more active, if there was a test,
Yeah,
physical literacy, your words,
yeah.
there's an incentive. That's
Yeah,
all.
I mean, it already exists, right? Sometimes you get X number of dollars for signing for a gym membership, or if your BMI is of a certain level or otherwise.
Yep.
Insurance companies, employers too, right? I mean, could they create incentives?
Yeah, well, some of the insurance companies are doing that now. You know, you can, if you don't smoke, if you demonstrate you go to clubs, you get a credit on your insurance. So it exists, I think, on a very modest level right now.
Yeah, I actually think there's one insurance company, I shall go name because I haven't confirmed it, but I think they actually give their employees a certain amount of money each year if they volunteer to coach a sports team, which is an interesting idea, easily introduced. What else we have?
Our next question is, are metrics getting in the way of grant makers supporting good work happening at the grassroots level?
Yes. Yes. Sometimes we're tracking metrics that are going to take a generation to affect, and grant makers are incredibly fickle. That's why we fund in 3-year cycles. If we only fund it for 3 years and we don't want to continue, we can go to the next thing, right? The next shiny object. So we should be looking at trend data. We should be looking at immediate impact. We should be looking at storytelling. But the big metrics are going to take too long to move, and sometimes we're waiting to understand those metrics for way too long before we're grant making.
What else, Andre?
How does a small community-based organization get to partner with large global organizations?
Yeah, that's a good one. And I think that that's something where, at least at Nike, we really sort of we've tiered our portfolio. So we have programs that we work directly with where we're sort of, it's kind of, sometimes you're getting married to us and we're all in, and either you like that or you don't. But with sort of strategic partners, we are really coming in and having a point of view around what's the innovation we're trying to drive with that partner. We might come in and sort of say, hey, your branding needs help. I mean, we bring a full sort of arsenal of assets to those partnerships. But we cannot, there's so many great organizations out in the field, and we simply cannot do that with all of them. And so we also have grant-making mechanisms, whether it is something called the Nike Community Impact Fund, where we do small grant making around our community retail doors, or it's coming out of some of our cause marketing funds. So the N7 collection funds grassroots programs that drive physical activity for Native American youth. That's a sort of hey, we want to build the field. We don't have the same level of partnership and expectations, but we want to kind of start to create opportunities for more organizations to grow and develop. So even with a global company, we just actually redid our Global Community Impact website, so it's a lot easier to figure out how you do plug in, because I know that for a while it was a mystery, but hopefully now you can see literally what are the grant application opportunities versus where we strategically partner.
Is CSR the only way to hold corporations accountable to the communities that they operate in, or is following the missions leading to the rise in unhealthiness?
Can you say that again?
Sorry. Is CSR the only way to hold corporations accountable to the communities that they operate in, or is following the missions leading to the rise in people being unhealthy?
Dave, you're nodding your head, so I think you got your mind around this.
Yeah, I have my mind around this because philanthropy tends to ignore market. And I think the mandated efforts to force corporate strategy out ignores market. And the reality is, all the corporate folks up here understand the market. And if we don't increase youth participation, they're all going to suffer. So there's a self-interest mode here beyond legislation or beyond a legal element that's got to be considered. And we've got to, frankly, us in the community, we have to do a better job of helping the corporations clarify their self-interest in playing in this space. I think you all have certainly demonstrated you're doing that already. There are other corporations we've got to do a better job with. But ultimately, the market will be far more effective than mandating a community return strategy.
Is the healthcare sector doing enough here? I mean, it's huge. It always drives me crazy. We talk about healthcare in this country. What are we going to do with healthcare? Nobody ever talks about physical activity, sport activity, actually like getting and keeping people healthy in the first place. You know, it's all about dealing with sick people, which is, of course, you need to do, but why hasn't that conversation shifted?
I think that conversation was starting. Look at your panel last year and talking about getting active and tying that to obesity and diabetes. But it's you know, I don't think it's a top priority as it should be. You know, it's something that, you know, in certain specialty hospitals like ours, yes, it's a focus because we understand that if you're obese, you're going to have joint problems. But I think as a national forum, it doesn't get that attention. We started down that path, and hopefully we will regain that momentum again. But I think that conversation has to happen.
You know, earlier today, Don Wright from HHS and acting executive director of the President's Council said a few things. Number one, that childhood obesity will continue to be a priority of this administration. Number two, that physical activity matters. Number three, that sport participation is particularly an area they see of opportunity. So what would your, and I apologize, we didn't prep for this at all in the green room, but it occurred to me now, it's a good question to ask. What would be the ask? What would you like to see backed up but from the federal government? What type of action to support those stated priorities? Anyone want to take that?
What pops to my mind is what you said as an example before, which is we don't have a health minister. You know, if we were like other countries where you had somebody that was overseeing under one rubric all the organizations working together, you'd be having the dialogue. It would not be perfect, but you have a place where that exists and lives, and we don't have that. Everything is very siloed. So that's what pops to my mind, having a centralized group that's looking at not just obesity, but the relationship to obesity to inactivity, diabetes, inactive sports, all those things, and putting those things together and coming up with those type of solutions to the problems. But we don't have that. So that's what comes into my mind.
For me, I'm not sure how much of it happens at the federal level. A little bit to the point that Dave made around sort of the time horizon to realize benefits. We're pretty good about talking about the billions of dollars things cost. We're having a harder time disaggregating the numbers around this investor makes this investment and gets this payout. And so I actually think it's sort of more at a local level. There's different math that we need to do in order to get people to sort of recognize the cost-benefit analysis.
Terrific. Any final question? Andre? You're all good. Okay, well listen, I wanted to thank everyone on this panel. It was really terrific comments. Great insights. All right, thank you folks.
Trying to say something else?
Yeah, I'm going to introduce Benita here.
Oh, you're live now.
No, I'm live now, okay. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Benita Fitzgerald Mosley, who is CEO of the Laureus Sport for Good Foundation, a terrific partner of the Aspen Institute Sports and Society Program and Project Play, going back several years. In fact, we did a roundtable in Mexico in January. And they're a sponsor of this summit as well. And Benita has, if everybody could grab a seat here, we'd appreciate it. Benita has has something to say, an announcement to make. Here you go.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's hard to see everyone here. What a great panel. We just heard in, Collaboration Nation. It's great and really excited about Project Play 2020, and I'll kind of align that a little bit as I talk for the next couple of minutes. But as Tom was saying, we're a longtime partner of Project Play. We've done several research projects together, conferences, and of course a proud sponsor of the Project Play Summit this year and for several other years as well. Our work at Laureus Sport for Good Foundation is really to work together to unleash the power of sport to achieve social change. And together we can harness sport's ability to unite communities, reduce violence, educate kids, improve their health and their social and emotional well-being as well. And together we can realize sport's full potential to make our country a better place. So in essence, Sport for Good is the intentional use of sport to achieve these outcomes around education, employment, violence, social and community development. And I am a 1984 Olympic gold medalist in the 100-meter hurdles. I personally have benefited from all the wonderful lessons and experiences that I've gained through sport and has enhanced my life from my sport participation all the way through my professional career. And, so we want to catalyze Sport for Good across the United States, and we want to make Sport for Good a viable tool that can positively impact communities across the U.S. We want to build chapters across the country and really make Sport for Good a unified nationwide movement. We started Sport for Good New Orleans back in 2014, and we've brought together 20 different cross-sector organizations there in New Orleans to determine how we can use sport to have that community reach its full potential. And we've created a game plan together with those 20 organizations to intentionally use sport to reduce violence and obesity, and specifically in measurable ways. And these organizations are now impacting, in just 2 years, 5 times the number of organizations they were. We fund 6 organizations, and collectively they were reaching 10,000 kids 2 years ago, and now it's 50,000 kids. And so that, in addition to the work we were doing on the ground to address violence and obesity, is really, really important. So through our place-based initiatives, we're connecting people that want to uplift their communities through sport. Together, they're sharing resources, working through common challenges, they're setting collective goals, and effectively creating the change that they set out to achieve. But they're doing it together, and they're really making a difference in New Orleans. So after our success in New Orleans, we launched Sport for Good Atlanta just this past July, just a few weeks ago. And we're pouring, Laureus is pouring $1 million a year for the next 3 years, and hopefully for many years after that, to strengthen youth sports programming in the West Side, 3 specific communities in the West Side of Atlanta, which is us really in the shadows, literally, of the new Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And today, we're proud to announce that we're going to be launching Sport for Good New York City and Sport for Good Chicago in January of 2018. Caitlin mentioned it a little bit earlier, but we're excited that Nike is our founding sponsor of Sport for Good New York City. We're proud to have Caitlin and her team supporting our efforts to use sport to transform communities. So in 2018, in January, we're alongside the new chapters in New York and Chicago. We're going to launch our Sport for Good League. It's a digital community that's going to bring people together that are passionate about sport for social change around a shared platform. And the Sport for Good League will give members access to these resources online, tools that can register for events and training on the ground in their cities, and really take their impact to the next level. And one of those tools is going to be a Sport for Good map, really a map of all of the sport-based youth development organizations around the country. And we invite any and all of you that use sport for social change in your sports programs to get online and join when we launch. The best way to do that at this point in time is to get on our website. You can go to map.laureususa.com. I think Risa said she was going to tweet that for us a little bit later, so you'll see that online. We'll tweet it as well, map.laureususa.com. And you can go put your email in, and come January when we're ready to launch all these great things, then you'll be the first to know and be able to sign up accordingly. So thank you so much for having me today, Tom. We appreciate it. We enjoy the partnership with Project Play. I think Project Play 2020 is great in aligning what we do. We'd like to be in 20 cities by 2020, so I think this coming together of our organizations is really important. So thank you.
Thanks, Benita. Really exciting announcements happening, and it teased the stage quite well for what we're about to do. But first, I mean, you know, Project Play, right, we're about access, we're about health, and Laureus has been a real leader in what happens once they're there, right, in the development that can happen through sport. And so it's a really symbiotic relationship, and we're really grateful for Laureus' support for the past 3 years. Really, the only other 3-year sponsor of the summit is Nike, and that says a lot about the leagues that the two of them are part of here as our partners, and we appreciate that very much. Really exciting announcements that Benita started us with. And there are a lot of organizations, maybe not with $1 million to invest in the next 3 years, which is quite impressive, but that are doing good work in the communities in which they live. And so through our What's Your Play platform, we aim to recognize those groups, help them connect with each other, help them connect with some of the communities that we're working with, maybe some of the communities that you're working with as you learn about their work here today. So as I call the name of the organization and the representative who's here from these groups, please come join me on the left. We'll get you a round of applause at the end and a group photo as we welcome you into sort of the What's Your Play network. And these are organizations that are taking and making new, meaningful, and specific actions that sync with Project Play that are, we believe, really are going to, change the availability and the access to sport in their communities. So, to kick us off, an announcement, an update really, is that last year at the 2016 Project Play Summit, YUSA announced a revamping of their youth sports resources to be aligned with Project Play's 8 strategies. The first time in 20 or 25 years that YUSA, which serves 1.6 million youth, will be revamping their youth sports curriculum. We're really honored to know that Project Play is at the core of that. I spoke with YUSA just the other day, and they've been working on that for the past year, and they're officially releasing the new resources in 2018, in the beginning of 2018. So if there's a Y in your community, if you're here with a Y, keep your eyes peeled for that, and we're grateful for their confidence in Project Play's framework to be serving the kids across this country through their programming. Now for this year's What's Your Play organizations, as I said, if you're in the room with us today as I call your organization, please join me on stage. These are in the order of Project Play, the 8 plays, right? So the first play is Ask Kids What They Want, and we're really proud to be recognizing the Parks and People Foundation based in Baltimore, Maryland today. Alicia Copeland, are you here? Parks and People Foundation is launching 6 new sports leagues in Baltimore, and what's really noticeable about this is that the leagues they're launching were determined by youth sport surveys. They asked kids what they wanted. Kids said, this is what we want, and Parks and People said, we're going to deliver. The leagues include a focus on physical literacy, on character development, and environmental education. Thanks so much, Parks and People Foundation. Congratulations. Play 2. Reintroduce free play. Joy of the People Foundation in Minnesota. Ted Creighton, are you here? I see Ted coming up. Ted is the artistic director and founder of Joy of the People, a nonprofit organization in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. Joy of the People will be hosting a series of events across the Twin Cities during the 2018 World Cup, which, believe it or not, is not so far away. They'll be bringing a variety of fields of different shapes and sizes, some even inflatable, to get kids active while having the opportunity to watch the soccer games with their families. It's the only place, one of the only places that kids really can watch and play at the same time and be part of this community environment. Joy of the People, I think you're going to be bringing a lot of joy to the kids in the Twin Cities during the World Cup. Congratulations. Play 3, Encourage Sport Sampling. Seacoast Public Health Network, Kristen LaFleur, are you here? The Seacoast Public Health Network is a regional health network out of New Hampshire. They're launching a new initiative based in Exeter in partnership with the local school district and a number of sports leagues to auto-qualify any child who is part of the free and reduced lunch program to receive scholarships to participate in sports. The goal is to make a variety of sports available for youth from low-income homes and to reduce the stigma of getting financial assistance to participate. We think it's really innovative, and we're really proud to have you here with us today. Thank you. Revitalize in-town leagues. Play 4. The Volo City Kids Foundation. Nyla Batista, are you here? The Volo City Kids Foundation in Baltimore, Maryland, is actually launching new rec programming in DC in fall of 2017. Programs are free, they're local, and they're focused on development and skill. They train all volunteers on how to develop leadership skills through sports, and they provide after-game meals for players and their families. Also quite noticeable is that the Volo City Kids Foundation uses funding from their adult rec leagues to provide sports programming for kids in their communities. Thanks for being here with us today. Congratulations on your new leagues. Play 5, Think Small. Today, Street Soccer USA, LA 84, and the LA City Council President Herb Wesson's office, I think Lawrence Cannon and Oscar Delgado, are you here with us? Come on up, are announcing that their partnership, which will connect youth who are experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness to soccer and other wraparound services, will launch in the Watts neighborhood in LA in October. In the next 5 years, the programs will establish 10 street soccer parks, and they will be hosting an annual tournament with the support of the Los Angeles Galaxy Foundation. Please welcome Oscar Delgado and Lawrence Cannon to the stage. Play 6, Design for Development. We're thrilled to be recognizing USA Wrestling. Mike Clayton, are you in the room? Come on up. USA Wrestling is revamping the training program for wrestling athletes to emphasize physical literacy, movement and position skills, health skills, and life skills. The new curriculum will launch in 2018, and we're really pleased that Project Play's emphasis on physical literacy has made its way to a national governing body like USA Wrestling, which is so innovative in the work that they do. Congratulations. Play 7, Train All Coaches. The National Fitness Foundation. Chris Watts, you still with us? As you heard earlier today, the National Fitness Foundation is investing up to $50,000 in trainings and grants to ensure PE and quality PE for youth in Baltimore in partnership with Project Play Baltimore, beginning in spring 2018. Chris and the National Fitness Foundation, we're thrilled to be partnering with you in our first model community in Baltimore. Thank you for your support. Play 8, Emphasize Prevention. Hospital for Special Surgery. Joe Janoski, are you here? Come on up. The Hospital for Special Surgery, as you heard Laura allude to earlier today, is launching a virtual workshop that replicates their existing ACL workshop. But because it's virtual, it makes the education free and available for all, regardless of where you live. The workshops provide resources for youth sport coaches, and it's launching later this year. Hospital for Special Surgery, thank you so much for tackling ACL injuries and emphasizing prevention of those injuries and others through your resources. We've got one last What's Your Play announcement because we announced one for each play and then also for the call for leadership, which we could casually call Play 9. Jim Ditto and Winning Communities, are you here? Here he is. Winning Communities is launching programming in 5 communities around the country, training high school, college, and university students to lead community sport and health programs. Students will work with the Office of the Mayor and city officials, park and recreation boards, schools, hospitals, and other community organizations to implement programs and develop new ideas. Let's hear it for Winning Communities. In total, these groups reach thousands of kids, and that's how this work gets done. A thank you and congrats to all of you on stage today, and a thank you and congrats to all of you who submitted What's Your Play applications. It's incredibly competitive, and to be honest, it's incredibly inspiring as our team is working through them to understand all the different nuances and what makes it up here, but it's not because the other work that was submitted was any less important or inspiring. So thank you for using Project Play in your communities. In the coming weeks, you can learn more about these groups on the Project Play Report microsite at youthreport.projectplay.us. We'll be back next year to recognize even more organizations, 9 of them, that are making new, meaningful, and specific commitments to action. Send us an email for more information. Check out online, on Twitter, on Facebook, about how your organization could be up here next year. Now, we're going to take a group photo, and then I'd like to introduce my colleague, John Solomon, who's going to be up here in conversation with New York Times reporter and author Karen Crouse. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is the final conversation of the day, and it's titled The Best Sports Town in America. I hope you all will be as charmed and as inspired about this book as I was when I read it. It's called Norwich. It's coming out in January, and it's about a small Vermont town's ability to raise Olympians who are healthy, happy, and grounded athletes and people, more importantly. Very happy to welcome Karen Crouse back up to the stage. She was here earlier. She's an award-winning sports reporter for the New York Times. She also is a former swimmer at the University of Southern California. She covers pro golf and the Olympics for the New York Times. Karen, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
For being here.
Super excited to talk about this book. So
it's really a book that could be a model for what communities could look like in youth sports. And just to sort of set the scene a little bit, Norwich, Vermont is a small town of about 3,000 people. They've put an athlete on almost every U.S. Winter Olympics team and has won 3 medals. So to put that in perspective, Spain has 46 million people, and they've won 2 Winter Olympic medals since 1936. New Zealand has 4.7 million people. They have won 2 Winter Olympics medals. So, Karen, this is a town of 3,000 people.
Yep.
They've produced 11 Olympians dating back over several decades, won 3 medals. What is going on in Norwich, Vermont?
it's some powerful maple syrup, I'm telling you. It was really interesting because I had never stepped foot in Vermont before I went to research for this book. And what I found is that obviously Vermont it's quirky, it revels in its independence, and so the athletes I came upon are for the most part I didn't find a figure skater in the bunch. It's ski jumpers and mogul skiers, and so they're not attracted to those sports to get rich. So they are maybe going to these sports with a pure purpose to begin with. But what I also found very quickly is that in this town and in Vermont in general, they sort of raise their children the way they once did the farmers did their cattle and whatnot, organically. No supersizing, no genetically modifying to try to get better, bigger results. So it really started out as a sports book and became more of a parenting guide, because as I've sat here today listening to all these terrific panels, what has really struck me is that this town really is the paradigm of the project play embodiment. You know, many of the kids, almost every one of the kids plays sports at some time because they actually still have a recreation department, and it's a no-cut recreation department. So anything that you do, you are guaranteed participation in. Most of the kids do return year after year, and they try many sports. In fact, of the 11 Olympians, the 10 of them changed sports with the season in high school. One of the Olympians played 4 sports. So they really have not, they've been able to stiff arm this whole professionalization model that is driving parents elsewhere insane.
So I want to touch on that a little bit more, on that model, the professionalization, and you write that they haven't caught up and stayed up to date with the arms races. They're not involved in that with academics and with sports. Is that something they chose to do? And also, how do they maintain it, as they continue on over these several decades?
So we talk about modeling, and it starts with the parents. Many of these parents, they forsook high-powered careers in urban centers when they had children because they wanted to give their children the childhoods that they had. So they were looking for a more rural place to raise their children. So they're in some ways self-selecting because they're choosing an area. Norwich is across the Connecticut River from Dartmouth, but it is 90 minutes from the nearest airport where you can get, decent connections. It's 2 hours from Boston. It's, I think, nearly 5 hours to New York. So you have to be willing to be a little farther afield from where all the quote-unquote action is. But I also think that all the parents I came across, they model for their children the behavior that they hope to instill in their children. They all are very active. They exercise for the sake of exercising, not for any other reason, not for competitive purposes, but just because they see the mental benefits or they want to commune with nature. And they also highly value education, highly value community. It was such a joy. I actually moved to this town for 6 months, and it was such a joy to see the communitarian spirit. I have spent 30 years covering sports, and too often I feel disheartened by the zero-sum game that sports have become, even with parents. Like, if my child prospers, your child doesn't. My child wins at the expense of your child. So it creates this cutthroat competitive atmosphere. Norwich has managed to avoid that. In fact, when I was researching the book, I remember being in an exercise class, and these ladies came up to me afterward and said, "Are you the lady writing the book? Well, you need to talk to Edie because her son is an aspiring Olympian in the moguls." So here were other parents touting someone else's child, and that was very, that embodied what I found in Norwich. Not only has Norwich produced or put one of its residents on every U.S. Winter Olympic team except for one since 1984, it has put 2 Summer Olympians on teams, including an 800-meter runner. And it was so funny. I was talking to one of the ski jumpers, and he said, yeah, being the best ski jumper in America is like being the tallest midget, but everybody runs. So for Andrew Wheating to make the Olympic team, that's really something. You really need to talk to him. And he told me something that has stuck with me. He told me this very early before I could really appreciate it, but he said, in a lot of towns, it's sort of their Darwinian way of life that the strongest survive, but here it's the survival of all of us. And I really don't think that you can overstate the communitarian spirit and the one for all for one, that community that really propels this city or this town, its success.
There's some great anecdotes you have in this book of the Olympians. My favorite is Hannah Kearney. Hannah was an Olympic medalist, a gold medalist, mogul skier. She won gold in 2010. She goes back to Sochi trying to repeat in 2014. She falters just a little bit, and she ends up winning the bronze, and then she's crushed. She's in tears. She tweets.
She describes the bronze as it's like a broken heart. And the town of Norwich, when she won the gold medal in 2010, they threw this great victory parade, kind of like how I pictured the ticker tape parades in New York City when champions in the 30s and 40s would return home. So they did this on a much smaller scale for Hannah. So in 2014, when these townspeople read this post and could see how heartbroken she was, they just very organically said, we cannot let her feel this way. We have to do something. And so they rallied and in a matter of days put together this homecoming parade for Hannah. So here she comes home and thinks she's the biggest failure because third place is the second loser. That's her perfectionist mentality. But they hold this parade and make her feel in no uncertain terms that they could not be more proud of her. And she told me that by the end of it, what might have devastated her for months or years, and boy, this is really a window into the elite athlete's psyche, that you would be devastated by a bronze medal for months or years. She said it only took her, a days or weeks to get over, and she owed that to Norwich, that Norwich was almost there as her collective therapy. When she was having trouble really framing her performance in a healthy light, they would try to do that for her.
And share a little bit about the third grade teacher at the parade who shows up. Hannah's, devastated. And what did she keep all these years?
So Hannah, in third grade, they had a needlepoint project. And so this third grade teacher had saved Hannah's needlepoint project for all these years and thought that this was the perfect time to present her with it. So she had her come back to the third grade classroom. A classroom where, by the way, Hannah in third grade had burst into tears when she found out that she was going to have to share a desk because she thought that she was now a big girl who should get her own desk. I mean, this is how this woman is wired. But presented her with this needlepoint that said, "Home Sweet Home." And Hannah said, when she received this gift, she had two thoughts, like only in Norwich would a third grade teacher save this child's project for all these years. And then her second thought was, but how terrific that I live in this place where this teacher did.
Yeah. It's worth noting also the demographics of Norwich. It's mostly white, it's middle class to upper middle class, median household income is $89,000. So how can that model, community support, sports isn't your only ticket, you have another identity, the collaboration among the people in the community, how can that model be transported to other demographics, if you think it can?
Yeah, I think they have such a humanistic approach to raising their children and a holistic approach, and I think that transcends any kind of demographic, because I am always puzzled, and as someone who grew up as an athlete and then I've been around athletics my entire adult life, I'm just baffled by this notion that parents invest so much in their children as if sports is their golden ticket, their meal ticket to a better life, when really if you look at all of the percentages that we've seen today where less than 1% of the kids who play sports in high school go on to play in college, and then it gets whittled down even more. Really, education is your golden ticket. And because of this demographic, they clearly understand that. But Hannah is a great portal to show how the generosity of this community is also something worth replicating. She reached a certain point where she was going to have to start traveling nationally, and her parents sat her down and said, we cannot afford for you to, we just can't afford to send you to competitions where you have to travel by plane and stay in hotels, so you're going to have to figure this out. So she drew up, she must have been 12 or 13 at the time, she drew up a little resume and got on her bike and went to area businesses and got a little bit of support that way. And then there was the father of a man in town became her anonymous benefactor. She never met this man, and he supported her, gave her the bulk of her financial support until she made the national team. And he asked for 2 things in return. Such gifts when you hear what I'm going to tell you. He said, I want you to give me a budget for how you spend every dollar of the money that I give you. So here, at an age when a lot of kids don't really appreciate the value of a dollar, Hannah had to figure out exactly how much money she was spending for each trip, how the breakdown of how much does a plane ticket cost, how much does it cost to eat for a day, how can I get the best hotel rate? So she was doing this all herself. Her parents were not doing this. Hannah was doing this. And then the second thing he asked for was her report card. So he didn't care how she performed in her sport. He wanted to see what kind of grades she maintained. And so she told me that without even realizing it at the time, he was giving her such a valuable gift, not only of the money, but of time, of management of money, and also making her understand at such a young age that academics was the priority. As much as she thought that sports was her world, he was reminding her academics is what is going to carry you far.
You've covered a lot of Olympians, you know, as a reporter. I wonder, is there a big difference between the Olympians you deal with who from Norwich and the other U.S. Olympians?
I was really struck by how well they've been able to segue into their post-sports lives. I would say that of the Olympians that I've covered, and of the Olympians that I grew up with, that I swam with in college, well over 50% have dealt with major depression, a lot of mental health issues once they retire from their sports, because it has been their self-identity. And they don't really grasp, well, if I have all of these life skills I've developed, they're easily translatable into other areas. The time management, the self-discipline, all of the delayed gratification, all of these things you're learning without even thinking about it as you pursue your sports goals are hugely impactful in the next area of your life. But they don't see that. So I cannot really overstate how many lost souls I've seen. And I'm talking about some of the most successful athletes that you've heard of. So because these people have been developed holistically, their self-identities were never all about their sport. Even for someone like Hannah, who saw herself largely as a mogul skier, the townspeople were there always to say, no, Hannah, we see you as a great representative of the community. We see you as someone who is very much a part of our fabric of the community. So they were always letting her know that she was so much more than a mogul skier. And I think that tie to the community is just really their salvation. The 2 ski jumpers that are probably the best ski jumpers that America has ever produced, Jeff Hastings and Mike Holland, you can find them during the ski jumping high school season at Hanover High. One of them will be grooming the hill. The other will be on the PA system doing the announcing. These guys are the Michael Phelps and Ryan Lochte of their sport. And here they are 3 decades later, just so involved on the grassroots level, not because they're being paid, they're volunteering their time. In fact, Mike Holland's wife joked to me, at least I think she was joking, said, during the winter, Mike spends more time volunteering on the hill and ski jumping than he does at his actual job. But they do this because all of these years later, they're so passionate about their sport, but it also was modeled for them that this is what you do. You don't just take and take and take from your community, you give back, you pay it forward. It was was done for them, and they are doing it for others.
Last thing, reporters as a whole tend to be cynical. And I say that as a recovering journalist, as a recovering reporter, so I know. As you're reporting this, as you're writing this, is there any part of you going, this is just too good to be true? This can't, there's got to be something else going on here in Norwich, or am I missing something?
Right. Well, I think there are two things that mitigated that. Obviously, not everyone. There are helicopter mothers and fathers there, but of the last 10 Olympians produced by this town, there were none that I saw. But I grew up in Santa Clara in the 70s, and this was a time when Santa Clara was still agrarian. So it, in many ways, when I stepped foot in Vermont, I felt an instant connection that I could not explain because it reminded me so much of Santa Clara in the 70s. And I think I didn't feel cynical about it because this was the sort of support that I grew up with. I grew up among Olympians, being coached by Olympians, so it really normalized what is this extraordinary feat. Made you think, of course I can go to the Olympics someday. You know, my last 3 coaches have done that. So for that reason, I was probably less cynical. And also, I first found out about this town in a reader email when I was at the Sochi Olympics, which I am not a cynical person by nature, but the last few Olympics could turn me into a cynic because Sochi was just a miserable experience. It was hard to not feel as if you were Putin stagecraft, that you could see all of this money that was being spent for what purposes, that a lot of these facilities were going to become instant white elephants after the Olympics were over. You could see the unrest that was, you almost felt like after the last person left Sochi that war was going to break out across the border. You saw athletes being pushed to do more and more daring feats at the expense of their well-being just to entertain the masses. It felt to me, as someone whose whole life has been shaped by the Olympics, that the purity of the Olympics, or what for me was the purity of purpose, we were so far beyond it that I wasn't sure it was recoverable. So this reader email, I cannot thank the person enough for making me aware of this small town because it renewed my faith in the purity of purpose of the Olympic movement.
Well, it's a terrific book. The book is Norwich. I highly recommend it. And Karen also has some cards to pass out.
It's out January 23rd, but here I have cards to pass out so that you don't forget. And you can pre-order at your nearest, dearest independent bookstore or at Amazon.com.
Great. Thanks. I'm going to... Thank you, Karen. Thanks. Now we're going to bring up Tom Farrey to close the day.
All righty. Okay. Yeah, boy, we are glad you found that town too, Karen. You know, I mean, within Project Play, we're always trying to move toward the ideal, and to know that one town has actually kind of figured it out and is consistent with the, the notion that we had very early on that it's not an either-or scenario of elite sport or recreational sport, that there's really a nice integration. That if you get it right at the base, good things are going to emerge eventually. You know, as long as you put the child at the center of the experience, and you focus on every kid in the community, that great stuff is going to happen at the very top. So, bravo! I can't wait to. Well, I've already read the book, but can't wait to see it get out and have it read by everyone else. Please distribute it. Help everyone know about this terrific book that Karen has put together. So to bring it home, we're going to do a couple things here. One, we'd like to finish up the Slido polls. So pull your phone back out again. We're going to vote on the last 3 plays, how well stakeholders have done in the past year in 3 of the strategic areas of opportunity that we have identified within Project Play as key in getting and keeping kids active through sports. So the very first one is what grade do you give stakeholders in the past year in encouraging sports sampling? So again, go to slido.com, the 7th floor, and this question should pull up here. And what we mean, a reminder, what we mean by sports sampling is there are more than 120 different sports out there. Most kids are introduced to just a handful of them, but there's probably one that everyone can connect with and have a great experience with. Number two, not just experience a wider variety of sports, but multi-sport play, not insisting that a kid only play one sport at an early age. So in the past year, how do you feel stakeholders have done in encouraging sports sampling? Okay, looks like C is the most common grade. All right, terrific. So the next one would be what grade do you give stakeholders in the past year in providing sufficient places for kids to play? This is the play Think Small, which is really just all about being creative in the available play spaces that you have in your community, as well as developing new play spaces, whether it be mini pitches or otherwise. Because these big megacilities that are being built, they're fine, they're good, but what really matters most are providing kids nearby play spaces that they can access at low cost. So what grade do you give stakeholders in the past year in providing sufficient places for kids to play? Pull the results. Over there, I can't see them. Oh, here we go. Is that a D? Yeah, looks like it. Okay, all right. Well, a little bit of work to do there. Finally, what grade do you give the current state of youth coaching, okay, in terms of key competencies in working with kids? Define that as you would wish. Some of those that we have focused on are general coaching philosophy, safety, sports skills, and tactics. You also have data that's in your program. It is on the walls of this conference that can help inform that question as well. So what grade do you give the current state of youth coaching based upon really, the efforts of the past year? So let's take a grade there. There's, it's a C. Okay, all right. Very good. All right, well, good. So we're going to take those grades and we will put them into, we'll come up with an average again. We'll put them in the State of Play report, the National State of Play report that will be out later this fall. And we'll make sure that all of you are aware of that. The last panel is a terrific segue to tomorrow's work. We have our first ever workshop day at Project Play Summit. We've expanded the event from 1 day to 2 out of really the expression we've got from most folks, which is they come away from the conference saying, boy, this is really great. I can go back to my community and what do I do? Where do I start? How do I mobilize stakeholders? So we are going to provide those practical tools tomorrow to folks that we hope are going to be really, really useful. So you can maybe build a little bit of a mini Norwich right in your own backyard. By the way, poor Norwich. After this conference, everybody's going to move there, right? They want to keep their town small. Sorry, that's not happening anymore. All right, so with that, I'd like to bring up Darren Steele. Darren in the room here somewhere? All right, come on up, Darren. Darren is the CEO and president of USA Bobsled and Skeleton. He was the one who made that bobsled happen out there with the Project Play Wrap, and we're very grateful to you, Darren, for making that happen. My only question before turning it over is, how come we don't have any bobsled athletes from Norwich?
That's a good question.
You're in charge of making that happen. All right.
Thanks, Tom. USA Bobsled and Skeleton is very excited to be a partner of Project Play from the beginning. I still remember when Tom came and spoke to all the executive directors of the Olympic sports and explained what he was doing, and it just resonated immediately. Bobsled is the ultimate crossover sport. We target athletes from other sports. Nobody grows up doing just bobsled, and so that's been part of the model for a long time. So we love the athletes that have done multiple sports because they make better athletes for us. It's exciting to see how far things have come since the very beginning, but it's also obvious that we're not there yet. And even if we get to where we were 20 years ago, that wasn't probably the ideal either, because there's so many benefits to sports and physical activity that we really want to continue to push to increase the access and availability, and also do the right things to keep people in sports. And there's two things I want to share, and one is kind of something that I think about a lot as a leader, as a parent, for my coaches, or as a coach, and that is when I first got into a leadership position in my job. I was talking to my father, and he was asking how it was going, and I was frustrated with some of my direct reports, and I made the comment that, well, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And he responded to me with, look, you're a leader now. Your job isn't to lead him to water. Your job is to make him thirsty. And I never thought about it that way, but I think about that with my kids in sports, making sure that they are having fun and they're loving what they're doing, because if you lose that, you lose them. And so I think about that a lot. In terms of where we are and access, I've got a son who's 12, very active, loves every sport. He loves life in general, wants to try everything. But he's got autism, and so there's some challenges there. And for the first time, we're very excited because Little League has a challenger division, and so for the first time, he's going to be able to play. And we were going out, a couple weeks before it started, and I was pitching to him, and he's a natural athlete and doing really well. And that was the problem, because once they saw that he could hit the ball really hard, that wasn't going to work in that league because he was going to hurt somebody. And so it was, one more time that he wasn't able to participate in the programs that are available. And so that's maybe a one-off, but there are thousands and thousands of one-offs out there. And so we got to keep that in mind when we wonder how far does it have to go, and how far have we come. So those are kind of my personal thoughts. I'm excited to be able to present an award today as well. So there was a survey that went out, and the respondent who sampled the most sports is going to win this award. And there were over 90 people that participated. On average, they sampled 35 plus sports. That's pretty impressive. And the ultimate winner, and leave it to Project Play to have the first ever cool participation trophy. Natalie Hummel had 58. Are you here, Natalie? Come on up. All right, bring up Tom to close it.
Well, so we wanted to kind of add a little luster to the participation trophy idea. So I don't know if we did it there or not, but and we also want to kind of make a point, right? I mean, the Project Play 2020 group, one of their areas of focus will be sports sampling. 58 sports, okay? Now consider that the average kid, ages 6 to 12, only plays 1.8 sports today. Now it's not a pure apples to apples. You're an adult. This is over the course of your lifetime. It means these are things you may have done just one time or otherwise. But think about how playing, multiple sports and trying different activities has enhanced your lives and everyone in this room here. I mean, it's exposed you to so much. So this points out the priority that underscores the value of the priority that Project Play 2020 is going to be really driving at. Just a couple housekeeping items before we go here. Workshop day tomorrow, for those of you who are joining us, we'll start at 8 a.m. with breakfast. And check in our offices at DuPont Circle, which is about 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes from here on the other side of town. You'll check in downstairs. You'll come upstairs to the 7th floor. Today, before you leave, please stop by the bobsled for your photo op on the way out. Share it with the hashtag Project Play, and please share your thoughts with us in a post-event survey, the one I mentioned earlier, that is landing in your inbox tonight. And one last time, a big thank you to our sponsors, Target and NBC Sports, first of all. They are the lead sponsors, as well as Laureus Sport for Good Foundation USA, Nike, Harris Family Charitable Foundation, Personal Best Media, and the Horner Foundation. Like to thank our speakers, all 50 of them, 50 plus of them, who came, who came from all over the country to challenge us and inspire us. We'd like to thank the Project Play Summit contributors, the Sports and Fitness Industry Association, Sports Marketing Surveys, USOC, USA Bobsled and Skeleton, First Tee of Greater Washington, and Bill Mayer. We on the Sports and Society team would like to thank the Aspen Institute itself, Elliot Gerson, Walter Isaacson, for their support, throughout the development of this program. And I personally would really want to thank my small, powerhouse, incredible team that was, it was just Reese and I 8 months ago. Something like that. Now we're a team of 7. We're going to be larger even in a couple months from now. And they're really an amazing group. In fact, they deserve to be recognized by their superhero names. Okay, so first of all, Wonder Woman, Risa Assard. John Solomon, Superman, because he's a converted journalist like Clark Kent. Andre Fountain, Batman. And that really is his nickname. That's how this all got started. John Gaster, Spidey. Where are you, Spidey? There you go. Rania Bautista, who we call Storm. Where are you, Storm? Back there. Oscar Leone, we need to give you a name. Where are you, Oscar? There you go, in the back there. He's our intern. We don't want to saddle him with a superhero name that was till we got it right. And all the volunteers today who helped us make everything run so smoothly. And most of all, really you, the Project Play community. Those folks who have been plugged into this project for 3-4 years now, those who are new to it, we look forward to continuing those conversations, figuring out how you can engage, figuring out how you can activate, and we're open to ideas on how we can help you. We are very passionate about this. I mean, I changed careers. I was a journalist for 21 plus years with ESPN, and this Aspen project, never planned on getting into the nonprofit space. I just wrote this book, and we started this project driving towards solutions, and it became my true passion. And we do this, yes, it is a job, but we are all really trying to change the world for the better. And I have an amazing team with me, and you guys are all part of it. As Nina put it earlier, you're all family. So thank you for coming. What's that? Oh, reception. Please don't miss the reception. It's on the 8th floor here. Okay, thank you.
I messed up tonight. I lost another